A girl with beauty and brains, Danielle Ursini had the world at her feet. And in the spring of 1993, the 29-year-old decided it was time for a change of scenery. She moved from the Big Apple to sunny Palm Beach, Florida.
I found New York to be much more aggressive and fast-paced, and I really wanted to get away from that. So for me, Florida was a much healthier environment. I found the people to be much friendlier. I knew this is where I wanted to live.
But finding time to meet some of those friendly people wasn't so easy.
I worked so many hours. Dating just was not a part of my life. I wasn't even sure how I would be able to fit it in.
So when her friends suggested she check out the local classified ads for a date, Danielle decided to give it a go. And one soon struck her fancy. A successful businessman looking for a professional woman.
It wasn't someone to just have a good time with. The ad was more maybe looking for a meaningful relationship, and I liked that. So I actually called.
The man who answered was 31-year-old Tom Abrams. And what followed was a 3-hour marathon conversation.
Tom told me that he went to a very well-respected university in South Florida. That's where he pursued his MBA and also played football. He also shared that he was a stockbroker and that he owned his own firm. So I was very intrigued.
An academic, an athlete, and an entrepreneur. Everything about Tom seemed too good to be true. Danielle hung up the phone feeling eager to meet Tom in person. A couple days later, she got her chance.
On our first date, we went to a local movie theater to see an animated kids movie. He wasn't just a businessman in a suit, he could also have a more playful, fun side to him. Of course, I loved that.
As more thoughtful dates followed, the middle-class New York girl found herself in an upper-class fairy tale.
There was a lot of whining and dining. He always bought me beautiful, beautiful jewelry. So this was really a whole new world for me.
Danielle definitely fell hard and fast for Tom. It was a whirlwind. He swept her off her feet.
Behind all the presents and pampering, a genuine love began to flourish.
I was very comfortable with him. It just seemed like this was just a perfect fit, a perfect match.
So after just 4 months of dating, Danielle was ecstatic when Tom popped the question.
We knew we both wanted to be married and we both wanted to have a family. So I was very, very excited. It was all part of the fairy tale.
A few weeks before the wedding, Danielle decided it was time for her to do something special for Tom.
I had wanted to put together a scrapbook. I really was interested in getting pictures from his college football days because memorabilia was really important to me.
But when Danielle asked Tom about the photos, his response took her by surprise.
He told me that he had lived in a trailer and that there was a fire and that everything was destroyed. He had lost all of his pictures, all of his degrees, everything was gone. And I was just devastated to hear that.
Danielle could tell it was a sensitive subject for Tom, so she decided to focus on their future instead of Tom's past. A few months later, the two lovebirds tied the knot in a small ceremony with just their closest friends and family in attendance.
It was a fairy tale wedding right there on the lake. I can remember walking down and the harpist playing. It was beautiful.
It was definitely a storybook relationship. So she was very happy. It doesn't get any more perfect than that.
With 2 words, I do, a simple girl from Queens became a Palm Beach princess and officially joined the privileged world of Tom Abrams.
We were going to begin our life together, and it was going to be a perfect life.
But all that glitter was not gold. And behind Tom's sparkly exterior was a very dark secret. One that would turn Danielle's fairy tale into a nightmare.
He was definitely a master manipulator.
This guy knows what he's doing.
I never could have prepared myself for how terrifying things would become.
In the summer of 1994, newlyweds Danielle and Tom Abrams were living the high life.
We were really enjoying being newlyweds. He was working full-time, and we then opened my counseling center. And about 6 months later, I was pregnant. Tom was just delighted to hear that his first child would be a son, and someday would be the heir to his business.
But every prince needs a castle, and Tom decided an upgrade was in order. So the couple soon found themselves buying a luxurious house in the prestigious Aero Club.
People like to say, oh, I live in the Aero Club, and people knew where the Aero Club was. They had their own landing strip, and you actually land your private plane in your backyard. So it was the saddest symbol for Tom.
But with the purchase of the new home, Danielle noticed Tom's spending went beyond luxurious. It became downright gluttonous.
I took a small trip to New York, and when I came back, he had leased a Ferrari.
Tom bought a race car. He bought a plane. And I thought, wow, that's a lot. When it came to toys, there were no boundaries. If he wanted it, he was going to buy it.
As Tom's spending got more and more out of hand, Danielle became increasingly uneasy.
It was always bigger and bigger and bigger. And on a moral level, that worried me. But Tom would explain that it was necessary because he managed people's money and you had to make a good impression. So I was torn between 2 worlds.
When their son was born in August of 1995, Danielle became more disenchanted by Tom's world when it seemed he had no interest in spending time with her or their new baby.
He wouldn't be home from the office until really late, and that was difficult. But again, he had to run the business. He was managing the finances of some prominent people, and he had to present the image and live it out.
Not that Danielle's husband wasn't at times gracious with money. Tom had, after all, started the Phoenix Foundation to raise funds for charities benefiting needy kids.
Abrams' chief claim to fame was his charity that was doing so much good work down here in South Florida. And he was a gregarious guy, and he knew how to throw a party.
He launched his first charitable grand-scale event. Tom was rubbing elbows with celebrities and athletes and high society. This was definitely an image builder.
While Tom focused on his reputation, Danielle focused on family. And in May of 1997, the couple welcomed a second child into the world. This time, a baby girl.
I hoped that when we had the second baby, maybe he would be home more, maybe he would be more involved.
But as Tom's work hours increased, so did Danielle's suspicions. She couldn't help but wonder if something else, or someone else, was keeping her husband away.
He would tell me he was at business meetings until late.
I have to work late. You know this.
I'd wonder, was he really at a business meeting? Was there something else going on? I would question him, and he would really get angry.
Don't question me about my work. You know.
So then that would just stop that. The message was clear. Don't ask.
But that fall, Danielle was forced to set her suspicions aside when Tom came home with some troubling news that would change everything.
He had all the outward signs of success. It took everyone aback.
No one had any idea of what Tom was capable of doing.
I remember being in a full-blown panic.
In the fall of 1997, Danielle Abrams was stunned when her husband Tom came home with some disturbing news.
I could see that he was a little more rattled or uptight than his normal confident composure. Tom told me that a particular client invested money with him, but her husband was not comfortable.
I just want to know, what do you want from here?
He wanted her to get the money back.
Which for Tom was easier said than done.
Tom told me it wasn't as quick as the husband expected to get the money back. There were some glitches.
Tom admitted his clients were now starting to question his business practices.
It really caused a stir. People became very angry, very resentful.
Danielle started to hear just little talk, little gossip around town. She thought something was not right. I didn't know where the stigma ends, if it's going to have any backlash on my friend.
We had an alarm system on the home, but I still did not feel real safe. In my mind, we were becoming more and more of a target. I started to become really fearful for our children's safety. I remember being in a full-blown panic.
To keep her family out of the crosshairs, Danielle thought it was best to maintain a low profile.
I told him very definitively, I know you need an image and an impression, but we need to downsize our lives.
We need the house. We need the membership. We need all these things.
And he did not like the idea of it at all.
I don't want to hear another word about it.
Instead, in an effort to repair his reputation, Tom's spending hit a whole new level. His largest and most extravagant purchase being a $100,000 membership to Palm Beach's most exclusive private club, the Mar-a-Lago.
With each new toy that Tom purchased, he was putting his family, his wife and children at risk. I went into protective mode.
One night in April of 1999, Danielle finally put her foot down.
When we had finished dinner with the kids and gave them their baths and put them to bed, I told him that I really felt like something needed to change. But he made it very clear to me, if you're not on my team, helping me reach my goals,
Then I don't need you.
he literally went into the master bedroom, took some trash bags, filled them, and moved out. And I was speechless.
I think in Tom's eyes, she was just supposed to enjoy her children and everything that she had and not question anything he was doing.
I was in a lot of pain, but I had to do it. Divorce was the only option at that point.
In December 2000, after 5 years of marriage, Danielle and Tom's divorce was final. But as the year went on, Danielle got wind of his new life through mutual friends.
The divorce definitely did not slow Tom down. He was schmoozing every night at different Palm Beach events, black tie events.
Despite appearances, Danielle's gut feeling was that Tom's world was closing in on him.
I could see his extravagant and reckless behavior just really ramping up, and he just couldn't keep going in that direction. It was going to blow up in his face.
Danielle had no idea how right she was until November 8th, 2001, when she turned on the news and finally discovered the devastating secret that Tom had been hiding all along.
There were so many lies. It was catastrophic.
He knew what he was doing. He intentionally hurt people.
It was devastating to hear the magnitude of what he had done.
On November 8, 2001, Danielle Abrams turned on the television and was astonished to see her ex-husband Tom on the local news.
There were FBI guys all around Tom's house. They were reporting that he was arrested. I just was stunned.
Danielle sat in disbelief as the news report announced that Tom Abrams had been arrested for masterminding a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme.
A classic Ponzi scheme is when you take new investors' money to pay off old investors and probably take a slice of it yourself. Abrams represented that he had managed more than $1 billion, when in fact he had far, far less.
After an anonymous tip prompted the FBI to take a closer look at Tom's business, what they found was astonishing.
He created these false statements. He told people that he was investing their money. And in fact, he took in almost $70 million from victims.
Danielle was shocked to learn that Tom had been scamming investors throughout their entire marriage.
Everything that I believed to be true about my husband was not as it appeared. It was hard because he really just devastated so many lives.
The worst part of Tom's scam, however, was whom he was scamming.
The types of investors that Tom Abrams had in his company were some of the most vulnerable people that he knew. Most of them were retirees and elderly people who were looking for a safe place to put their money.
Little did they know their money was gone the moment it exchanged hands.
One of the more heart-wrenching stories involved a man whose wife was dying of cancer and lost in the neighborhood of $750,000 because Tom Abrams cleaned out his accounts.
After the press aired Tom's dirty laundry, Danielle was able to trace his lies all the way back to when they met.
He was lying about his education, the fire that destroyed all of his pictures and memorabilia, because there was no record of Tom attending that university or playing football there. He created this whole personality. In the end, my husband not only committed fraud, but turned out to be a fraud.
On September 30th, 2002, Tom Abrams pled guilty to 15 counts of fraud and money laundering related to his Ponzi scheme and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And Danielle lost everything she'd gained in her divorce settlement, given that it was investors' money, not Tom's.
I don't miss that lifestyle for a moment. How do you compensate for the loss and the damage and the devastation to so many lives? I think that's a tough one that I've carried.
Today, Danielle and her 2 children, now teenagers, are thriving despite their family's ordeal.
It's been difficult for my children, but our faith and dependence on God is really what has carried all of us through.
Danielle is very resilient. She's done very well for herself. She just went on with her life being a mom.
Through her experience, Danielle has learned that no one is immune to the powers of a con artist.
Being a trained mental health professional, I should have known better. but he knew exactly how to hook me in. So pay attention to the red flags. Better to be safe than sorry in the end.
In the spring of 2010, Amy Anderton was having the time of her life. The perky 28-year-old was newly single and enjoying every minute of it.
I was excited about love and romance, and I thought the world was my oyster, and there was a lot of fish in the sea.
So that March, while Amy was hanging out at an Irish pub in Portland, Oregon, she didn't mind when one of the other patrons approached her.
How you doing?
I was finishing my glass of wine, settling up my tab, and he nonchalantly started a conversation with me.
The charismatic 34-year-old introduced himself as Logan Storm.
He had a thick Irish accent. He started talking about how he was a school teacher and how he was a do-gooder.
What about you?
He asked me about my job and found out that I did community work for a nonprofit. He was very excited to hear about what I did for work.
Well, I gotta run. Catch you later.
As the two went their separate ways, Amy didn't think much of the encounter until she arrived home and discovered a surprise from her new friend.
I found a little matchbook in my purse. It said, "The shy Irish fellow from the bar fancies you." He left his phone number on the note. His charismatic charm, it caught my interest, and I thought it was kind of sweet that he was saying he fancied me. So I sent him a text message. I wanted to see what it was about.
Logan responded right away and insisted on setting a date immediately the following night. Before Amy knew it, they were having a romantic dinner in a quaint little restaurant nearby.
It was nice. It was good conversation, getting to know each other. He had a lot to say about growing up in Ireland. He told me that he had a son that lived with him part-time, 3 days a week. He was very flirtatious, and I was flattered.
Logan was keen to see Amy again that weekend, so she invited him to a barbecue, and instantly her friends were hooked.
He was a nice guy. He was energetic, happy. He seemed to really care about Amy.
Logan seemed absolutely smitten with Amy. He was very starry-eyed over her. So I was encouraging Amy to see what becomes of this relationship.
Amy took her friend's advice and soon learned some interesting things about her new beau.
We were at a gathering with some friends, and I heard him talking about a former student who became a stripper.
I'm sexy a stripper. Really?
And he was mentoring her. I didn't give it much thought because he was always trying to help other people be positive and be their support.
But it wasn't until Logan began opening up about his own difficult past that Amy truly understood why staying positive was such a focus in his life.
He said that his dad spent time in a psychiatric hospital. So his mom thought that it was safer for him to grow up with his grandparents in Belfast, Ireland.
I was dating this girl for a little while, and she blew herself up making a film.
He never said specifically that he was involved with the IRA, but he alluded to that, and that's when they deported
To
him.
the United States.
Logan told Amy he eventually found his way back to Portland, where he'd managed to mend his relationship with his parents.
I admired him. I thought that it was great that he could grow up under such circumstances and become someone great.
But Amy would soon learn that this do-gooder was actually as bad as they come, as his vortex of lies pulled her into a world she never imagined.
I was just blown away at the levels of deception.
There was something mentally broken with him.
I was trying to make sense of what was going on. I felt gullible. I felt betrayed.
In the spring of 2010, Amy Anderton was starting to fall hard for her new Irish love interest, Logan Storm.
As a couple, we did a lot of different things together, getting to know each other, but I wanted to date for a little while and not rush into a relationship.
Amy was happy taking things slowly, especially when it came to meeting Logan's 12-year-old son. But Logan had other ideas, and he made them clear one Sunday morning in May.
Logan was going to pick up his son and specifically told me, "We're not coming back here directly, so take your time getting up and getting ready and let yourself out." So I was wandering around the house and making some coffee.
Before Amy knew it, she saw Logan and his son walking up the sidewalk.
I kind of freaked out and ran into his bedroom and shut the door. They came in and Logan said, "Son, Amy's still here. Would you like to meet her?" My heart sunk into my stomach and I just gulped. So I said, "Hi. Nice to meet you."
This is Amy.
I was kind of upset with him. It's like he wasn't respecting how I felt or my boundaries.
When Amy confronted him about it later that day, it was Logan who drew a line in the sand.
That made me feel really uncomfortable.
Oh, so it's all about you? Well, what about us?
He told me that he was not willing to invest in a relationship that wasn't going anywhere.
How are you supposed to have a relationship together without trust?
He wanted me to just let go and to just trust him.
So Amy decided to do just that, let go and take a chance.
That made an impression on me, and I thought that the relationship had potential to last forever.
But by the middle of May, Amy started to notice something was troubling her new boyfriend.
I could tell Logan was struggling financially. He talked about how it was hard for him to pay his bills. He said that he couldn't afford his house, and the only place that he could afford would be a little one-bedroom apartment.
There's nothing out there that I can afford.
And by the beginning of June, Amy couldn't take it any longer.
He made me feel like I had something that I could offer him to make his situation better. If I asked one of my roommates to move out, then he and his son could move into my house. So I offered it, and I was feeling pretty good about it.
It seemed an act of convenience for him to move in with her, as opposed to a conscious choice they made as a couple. But I was still emphasizing to Amy that I thought he was a catch.
Then, just a few weeks after Logan started to move in, their relationship was tested yet again.
It was about 11:30 p.m., and his phone rang. He said, "Oh, it's my former student who's a stripper, and she wants a ride home from the strip club." My reaction to that was, well, that's not okay, and if you want to have a relationship with me, you can't have other relationships like that going on.
You should not be talking with this girl. No, come back here. No.
He turned it around on me and said that I was making a big deal and stormed out of the house. I felt like he was hiding things from me.
Soon, Amy would uncover exactly what Logan was hiding, and the horrific truth would haunt her forever.
Amy was incredibly disturbed.
I was scared of what I had found. It was shocking to me.
You need to set boundaries.
No, this is ridiculous.
What are you trying to do?
In June 2010, after fighting with her boyfriend Logan Storm about his mentorship of a former student turned stripper, Amy decided to confide in a friend.
She told me that she sensed something was wrong, and she told me I needed to look into it. It was not normal.
Come back here.
Amy initially resisted and went over to Logan's to talk with him instead.
Amy seemed freaked out that he didn't know what could be wrong with that. That was completely inappropriate.
We had a very serious discussion about boundaries, and I asked him to call his former student and set up a time to go out to lunch or coffee with her and set some good boundaries. So he took my advice, which made me feel good.
While Amy felt she was making progress with Logan, she couldn't ignore her gut.
There was still something deep down inside of me that was questioning if he was hiding things. I didn't really trust him.
So Amy decided to play detective. She had no idea this was merely the calm before the storm. On the morning of July 23rd, Amy waited for Logan to leave for work before looking through his things.
I was feeling like Logan was hiding something, and I wanted to see what he was hiding. He had a jewelry box on the dresser, and I looked in it and saw a thumb drive. It looked like it was tucked under things to be hidden. I wanted to see what was on it, so I plugged it into the computer. I wasn't able to process what I was seeing.
Oh my God.
It was shocking to me. I found hundreds of pictures of child pornography on it. Very explicit, disturbing images of little children that were being raped and abused. I was scared of what I had found, and I didn't know how to respond to it.
Heart racing, Amy returned the thumb drive to its hiding spot.
Logan came home from work.
How you doing?
All right.
He took one look at me and said,
Look like you've seen a ghost.
and my response to him was, no, I'm just stressed out. I was nervous about bringing it up. I thought that maybe he would hurt me, to keep me quiet, to not tell anyone.
The next morning, she told Logan she'd made 2 decisions.
I told Logan I needed a break, and I needed to go visit my family in Utah. And I told Logan that I needed him to move out before I got back. He screamed loud, just let out a bellowing scream, just clenched his fists and screamed at the top of his lungs. I became more scared of him.
Amy quickly left and arrived a few hours later at her family's home in Utah. Once safe and secure, she made the most important decision of her life.
I decided to turn him in. I called 911. They had me describe everything and what I saw.
There were children, and they were really graphic.
The police got a search warrant and went to the home shortly after that. They told Logan that they needed to search the premises. They feared they were going to find images of child pornography on his computer. Logan remained completely calm. He wasn't shocked, he wasn't surprised. The detectives confiscated the computer and the thumb drive, but they did not arrest him at that point. They wanted to make sure their evidence remained intact. They didn't want to lose any of it. They didn't want to jeopardize it.
As soon as authorities examined the images on the thumb drive, they immediately put out a warrant for Logan's arrest.
He fled very suddenly. That was certainly not the behavior of someone who had nothing to hide.
While investigators searched frantically for the fugitive, Amy cautiously returned home to Portland, only to discover that her nightmare had just begun.
We did not see this coming.
I felt afraid for my life. I didn't know what he was capable of.
In the summer of 2010, Amy Anderton was terrified after her ex-boyfriend Logan Storm went on the run.
I was pretty scared for my life. I knew that he knew it was me who found the child pornography and called the police. I didn't know where he went, but when I came home, all of my things had been gone through in my room, and my spare key was not in its place. I thought Logan had been involved with the IRA in Ireland, so I called the cops because I thought that he had planted a bomb in my car.
While police found no evidence of a bomb, they did have an explosive piece of news for Amy. There was no chance that Logan was ever affiliated with the IRA. In fact, he never lived in Ireland.
The cops started to tell me that Logan grew up in Portland, Oregon, and didn't have an Irish accent. It was all a lie. I was just in shock. It made me realize I did not know who he was, and therefore I didn't know what he was capable of. I got a weapon and slept with it by my bed. I changed the locks because every sound of anything woke me up thinking it was him coming after me and getting revenge for ruining his life.
Amy was terrified. No one knew where he was, and the stress was really getting to her.
As Amy battled a flood of emotions, she realized everything Logan had told her was a lie.
I don't believe that his father spent time in a psychiatric hospital. I think that Logan made all of those things up to make himself look like a victim. He was manipulating me.
Equally disturbing was how Amy felt Logan had clearly turned his own son into a chess piece.
I think he was using his son to move into my house. I think it looked good for him to live with me, to have a girlfriend who was doing this good work in the community, and he was using me just to get what he wanted. I felt gullible. I felt betrayed.
And the girl Logan said he was mentoring?
I don't know if the former student slash stripper was just another one of Logan's lies. He was a predatory, deceptive liar.
I don't think anyone's ever going to know the truth about him. There's studies that show that people who are abusive have been abused before. I'm thinking that maybe he was a victim because he put himself in the victim role so much.
Meanwhile, after 7 months, Logan's attorneys located him hiding out in Europe. They convinced him to return to Portland, where he was officially booked for possession of child pornography.
I was very relieved when Logan was arrested, but it was so surreal.
On January 23, 2013, Logan Storm went to trial and pled not guilty.
I very much believe in our country and our laws. I respect the system and I respect the procedures.
Amy was forced to come face to face with the man she turned in.
The first time I saw him, I thought that I was going to be sick. I saw him do a double take, and I saw fear in his eyes. It made me feel powerful. I was protecting young children.
6 days later, the middle school teacher was convicted on 1 count of possessing child pornography. On September 10, 2013, Logan Storm was sentenced to 8 years for his crimes.
I think he deserved harsher. Honestly, this guy is somebody that should not be on the streets, ever.
It wasn't the maximum, but it was enough to show that it was a severe crime. And I didn't have to look over my shoulder, and I didn't have to worry where he was.
Today, Amy is still dealing with the reality of what she went through.
I feel like my life will forever be changed from this because I'm scared to get close to people. I'm scared that people could be hiding things.
Even though she's not ready to fully trust others again, Amy refuses to let what Logan did affect her future.
Amy is such a strong, honest person, and she's maintained an attitude of strength and perseverance. I'm really proud of her for that.
I'm very hopeful that other people will follow my lead, but if I didn't have such great friends, I don't think I would have made it through it.
The waters of the South Pacific have long held a certain mystique in the collective imagination, often painted as vast, tranquil stretches of azure separating idyllic, sun-drenched islands. Yet beneath this serene veneer lies a history etched in profound cultural shifts, quiet tensions, and moments of unyielding human tragedy. In the late 1930s, the archipelago of American Samoa stood as a profound testament to this duality. It was a place where the ancient, rhythmic pulse of Polynesian life was forced to share its heartbeat with the rigid, mechanical precision of a foreign military power. This was not merely a distant outpost of the United States. It was a territory firmly under the absolute jurisdiction of the United States Navy. The Naval Administration did not simply govern the islands, they commanded them. At the helm of this administration was the Naval Governor, a figure whose authority was virtually unassailable, holding the ultimate power to shape the law, judge the accused, and, when deemed necessary, decree the termination of a human life. It is within this highly pressurized atmosphere, a world suspended between ancestral tradition and martial law, that our story unfolds. The physical and administrative epicenter of this unique societal structure was the village of Fagatogo. Nestled against a spectacular natural harbor, Fagatogo was far more than a mere settlement of indigenous residents. It was the nerve center of the entire territory. To walk through Fagatogo in 1939 was to witness a stark physical manifestation of two colliding worlds. On one side, the formidable structures of the United States Naval Station dominated the landscape, with their utilitarian designs, administrative buildings, and the austere courthouse representing the ultimate authority of the American justice system. These structures were monuments to an imposed order, designed to project strength, discipline, and the unwavering rule of Western law. Interspersed within and surrounding this military footprint was the traditional Samoan village life, characterized by a deep, almost spiritual connection to the land and a complex social hierarchy that had governed the islands for centuries before the first foreign ships ever breached the horizon. Fagatogo was the stage upon which the grand narratives of the territory were played out. Any ripple in the social fabric here sent shockwaves throughout the entire island chain. It was a place where nothing could remain truly hidden and where the actions of a single individual could resonate with profound political and cultural implications. To understand the tragedy that would eventually stain the soil of Fagatogo, one must first grasp the intricate complexities of the traditional social structure. This traditional Samoan framework of chiefly titles and family organization was not merely a social custom, it was the very bedrock of indigenous identity, governance, and survival. Under this system, an individual was never simply an isolated entity. They were an inextricable extension of their extended family, their ancestors, and most importantly, their ancestral land. Land in this culture was not viewed as a commodity to be bought, sold, or casually traded. It was a sacred inheritance, a physical manifestation of a family lineage, and the ultimate source of their honor and standing within the community. Disputes over land and the prestige associated with it were deeply serious matters, often carrying the weight of generations of pride and unresolved grievances. In the 1930s, this ancient system was experiencing a profound and quiet friction with the modern, bureaucratic realities introduced by the American military presence. The Navy sought to impose linear, documented systems of ownership and a standardized legal code, concepts that often clashed violently with the nuanced, oral traditions and collective ownership principles of the Samoan people. It was a simmering cauldron of cultural misunderstanding and territorial anxiety, waiting only for a spark to ignite a tragedy. It is from this complex intersection of history, culture, and absolute military authority that the figures of Amoa and Sela emerge into the harsh light of history. Both men were indigenous residents, deeply embedded in the social fabric of the island, and both were bound by the invisible but unbreakable threads of their ancient societal system. Amoa was a man who held a specific standing within his community, a position that carried with it an inherent responsibility to uphold the dignity and the ancestral claims of his lineage. Sela, too, was a man of the islands, an individual whose life intersected with Amoa in a manner that would eventually prove fatal. The exact nature of their daily interactions remains recorded only in the sterile archives of military justice, but the underlying root of their animosity was clear. Between Amoa and Sela existed a deep, festering enmity, a bitter dispute rooted in the most volatile of subjects involving family honor and territorial rights. This was not a sudden argument born of a fleeting moment of anger. It was a dark, enduring resentment, a heavy burden of grievance that had been carried over time, steadily worsening within the intimate, interconnected environment of the village. In a community where everyone knows everyone and where history is remembered and recounted, such disputes do not merely fade away, they magnify, consuming the individuals involved until the tension becomes unbearable. The narrative of true crime often forces us to confront the moment when human restraint entirely collapses, when societal norms and the fear of consequence are completely overpowered by the raw, unfiltered surge of primal emotion. For Amoa, that moment was rapidly approaching as the year 1939 drew near its end. The presence of the United States Navy, with all its laws and its courthouse sitting right there in Fagatogo, was not enough to extinguish the burning fires of a traditional dispute. The naval authorities believed their system of justice provided a modern framework for resolving conflicts, a civilized alternative to the ancient methods of settling scores. However, the psychological distance between the courtroom and the deep-seated emotional reality of the indigenous traditions was vast. To Amoa, the resolution of his conflict with Sela may have felt entirely disconnected from the alien laws of the foreign administration. The honor of his lineage and the sanctity of his claims were paramount, demanding a resolution that resonated with the ancient ways, even if that resolution required the ultimate transgression. We are compelled to look back at the environment of Fagatogo in those final months before the violence erupted. The village, framed by lush, verdant mountains and the deep blue of the harbor, must have seemed impossibly beautiful, a stark contrast to the darkness brewing in the hearts of its residents. The days would have been marked by the routines of naval operations and the enduring rhythms of island life. Yet, beneath this surface calm, the tragic trajectory of Amoa and Sela was locked into place. The narrative of this case is not simply a mystery of identity. The perpetrator of the impending act was never shrouded in shadows. Instead, this is a profound exploration of inevitability. It is an examination of how a collision of cultures, a rigid military justice system, and the heavy, unyielding weight of ancestral pride culminated in an act of staggering brutality. The impending violence would not happen in secret. It would not be a crime hidden away in the dark corners of the island. It was destined to occur right in the open, in the very heart of the territory, serving as a brutal confrontation between the ancient ways of the Samoan people and the unforgiving laws of the United States Navy. The significance of the events that unfolded in Fagatogo extends far beyond the immediate loss of Sela and the subsequent fate of Amoa. This narrative stands as a critical juncture in the legal and social history of American Samoa. The brutal act of violence, the swift and uncompromising response of the naval court, and the ultimate, chilling climax on the 24th of November 1939 created a legacy that permanently altered the trajectory of the territory. The execution of Amoa was designed to be a definitive statement of absolute authority, a visceral demonstration of the consequences of defying the imposed order. The naval governor, possessing the power of life and death, chose to utilize the most extreme measure available to him, deliberately rejecting the profound cultural traditions of reconciliation and public apology that had served the Samoan people for millennia. The gallows were erected not just to end a life, but to send a message, a harsh warning echoing through the tropical air. Yet, the ultimate outcome of this harsh application of justice was not exactly what the military authorities might have anticipated. The horror of the execution, the public spectacle of a man being subjected to the ultimate penalty by the state, left an indelible scar on the collective psyche of the community. It became a dark milestone, a moment so profound in its tragedy that it silently shifted the moral compass of the territory. The story we are about to explore is the detailed chronicle of that shift. It is the story of an ancient feud that turned deadly, a military court that refused to bend, and a hanging that inadvertently became a catalyst for a permanent change in how a society views the ultimate punishment. From the lush, conflicted village of Fagatogo in the late 1930s, we begin a journey into the heart of a murder that effectively ended the era of the gallows in American Samoa, rendering the territory a place where the state would never again claim a life in the name of justice. As we delve into the specifics of this tragedy, we must carefully peel back the layers of time to examine the individuals caught in this fatal intersection of fate. We must look at Sela, a man whose life was brutally cut short, a victim of an anger he perhaps understood all too well but could not escape. We must examine Amoa, a man driven by forces both personal and cultural to commit an act that would seal his own doom. And we must scrutinize the overarching presence of the American legal system, a rigid machine of justice that demanded a life for a life, completely ignoring the complex emotional and cultural landscape upon which it was operating. The events leading up to the attack were characterized by a slow, agonizing buildup of tension, a tightening of the proverbial knot that mirrored the literal one that would eventually be tied. Every glance, every dispute over land, every perceived slight between the two men contributed to the inevitable climax. The true horror of this case lies not just in the violence itself, but in the tragic realization that two disparate systems of managing human conflict had completely failed to prevent it. The story of Amoa and Sela is a testament to the devastating consequences of cultural collision, a haunting prologue to a legal legacy that remains deeply relevant to this day. This is the chronicle of the final time the shadow of the gallows fell across the islands of American Samoa. We will meticulously trace the steps of both the victim and the perpetrator in those final, fateful days. We will examine the geography of the impending crime scene, understanding how the physical layout of Fagatogo contributed to the public nature of the tragedy. The juxtaposition of the serene tropical environment with the sheer brutality of the act creates a stark and unsettling contrast, a theme that permeates the entirety of this historical record. It asks us to consider how such profound violence can erupt in a place of such profound natural beauty. Furthermore, we must continually remind ourselves that this is not a work of fiction, but a sobering reality that extinguished one life immediately and legally eradicated another shortly thereafter. The archives hold the cold, hard facts, but it is our task to resurrect the emotional and historical weight of those facts. We must approach this narrative with a deep sense of empathy for the loss of Sela, recognizing the profound tragedy of a life taken through sudden, extreme violence. Concurrently, we must observe the machinery of the naval justice system with a critical, objective eye, understanding its motivations while acknowledging its ultimate failure to incorporate the deeply ingrained values of the people it governed. The stage is now completely set. The 1930s are drawing to a close. The United States Navy stands resolute in its authority over the islands. The ancient traditions continue to silently govern the hearts and minds of the indigenous population. And in the very center of this delicate, fraught balance, two men are on a collision course that will shatter the peace of their community. Their deeply personal conflict, rooted in the sacred soil of their ancestors, is about to explode into a moment of pure, irreversible violence. When the dust finally settles, the legal landscape of American Samoa will be forever changed. The story of the last man to hang in this territory begins now, a complex tapestry woven from threads of honor, anger, uncompromising law, and the ultimate, tragic cost of a cultural divide. To fully comprehend the tragedy that befell Sela, one must first understand the profound complexities of the world he inhabited. The village of Fagatogo in the late 1930s was a place where geography and sociology conspired to create an environment of inescapable intimacy. Nestled tightly against the deep, accommodating waters of the harbor and walled in by the steep, impenetrably green mountains of Tutuila, the physical boundaries of the village mirrored the rigid social boundaries of its inhabitants. It was a beautiful but geographically confined space, a place where distance from one's neighbors was an absolute physical impossibility. In a community such as this, anonymity was a foreign concept. Every resident was a known entity, their lineage traced back through generations, their family affiliations publicly understood, and their personal histories woven into the collective memory of the village. For a man like Sela, this meant that his life was lived entirely within the watchful gaze of his peers. There were no secrets in the shadows of the harbor, only shared knowledge and the heavy, continuous observation of the community. Superimposed over this ancient, closely knit landscape was the stark, utilitarian reality of the United States Navy. Fagatogo was not merely a traditional settlement, it was the administrative heart of American Samoa. The presence of the military brought a sudden influx of foreign architecture, foreign laws, and a completely alien way of measuring the world. The naval station, the administrative offices, and the courthouse stood as monuments to a civilization that prioritized rigid legal codes, documented property lines, and individual accountability. This new world operated on a clockwork schedule, driven by the imperatives of a global military power. Yet, breathing beneath this imposed infrastructure was the ancient, enduring rhythm of Polynesian life. The juxtaposition was jarring. A resident could walk past a meticulously maintained naval facility governed by strict federal statutes and, mere steps away, enter a traditional Samoan fail where disputes were mediated by the complex, nuanced rules of indigenous custom. It was a society experiencing a profound state of cognitive dissonance, caught between the demands of a modern naval administration and the deeply ingrained loyalties of an ancient culture. At the very core of this indigenous culture, and central to the lives of both Sela and Emoa, was the Whakamatai system. To call the Whakamatai merely a social structure is to severely understate its significance. It was the fundamental organizing principle of Samoan existence. Under this system, the concept of the individual was entirely secondary to the concept of the family. A person was not a solitary actor moving through life. They were an extension of their extended family unit, bound by absolute duties and obligations. At the head of these families were the Matai, the chiefs who held the ancestral titles and bore the ultimate responsibility for the welfare, the prosperity, and above all, the honor of their lineage. Sela lived his life entirely within the parameters of this system. His identity, his social standing, and his sense of self-worth were inextricably linked to his family name. He was a custodian of his family's legacy, expected to defend its reputation and uphold its rights against any and all challenges. This was a heavy burden to carry, a perpetual responsibility that dictated how he interacted with everyone in the village. Within the Whakamatai system, no concept was more sacred, more deeply contested, or more potentially volatile than the concept of land. To the American administrators sitting in their naval offices, land was a commodity, a piece of real estate to be surveyed, mapped, and assigned a legally binding deed. To Sela and the indigenous population, land was something entirely different. It was the physical manifestation of their ancestry. It was the soil in which their forebears were buried and the literal foundation upon which their chiefly titles rested. Land was blood, history, and spiritual identity poured into the earth. To possess land was to possess standing within the community. To lose land was to suffer an unimaginable blow to a family's honor. Because land was held communally by the extended family and administered by the Matai, the boundaries between different families' holdings were often based on oral traditions, ancient agreements, and natural landmarks rather than precise geometric surveys. This inherently fluid system of ownership, when coupled with the immense emotional and cultural value placed on the soil, created a landscape ripe for profound and enduring conflict. It is within this perilous intersection of family honor and territorial rights that Sela's fatal dispute with Emoa was deeply rooted. The historical record does not provide us with a granular accounting of the exact acreage in question or the specific words exchanged that initiated their feud. However, an understanding of the cultural context tells us everything we need to know about the immense gravity of their conflict. This was not a petty disagreement over a trivial matter. This was a bitter, deeply entrenched animosity concerning the most vital elements of Samoan identity. For Scylla, engaging in this dispute was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of existential duty. To back down, to concede to Amoa's claims, would not merely be a personal defeat, it would be a betrayal of his ancestors and a permanent stain upon his family's honor. Scylla was fighting for the very dignity of his lineage. The dispute over land and honor became a heavy, suffocating blanket that wrapped itself around every aspect of his daily existence in Fagatogo. Imagine the psychological toll of living in such close proximity to a bitter enemy. In the sprawling cities of the mainland United States, a person engaged in a fierce dispute could easily retreat to the anonymity of a different neighborhood, avoiding their adversary and finding solace in distance. In Fagatogo, no such escape was possible. The village was too small, the pathways too narrow, and the social gatherings too intertwined. Scylla and Amoa were forced to exist in a shared, claustrophobic space, their paths inevitably crossing, their mutual hatred a silent, vibrating frequency that everyone in the village could feel. Scylla would have seen Amoa in the village center, perhaps near the naval station, or along the paths leading up into the hills. Every accidental meeting, every averted gaze, every murmured comment from a bystander would have served to reinforce the bitterness of their feud. The tension was not an abstract concept. It was a physical weight, an ever-present shadow that followed Scylla through his days. The burden of defending his family's ancestral claims in such a confined, pressurized environment must have been exceptionally agonizing. The community of Fagatogo, bound by the same cultural rules and understanding the profound stakes of the dispute, functioned as a silent, collective witness to the escalating hostility. In a society governed by the Fa'amatai, a feud of this magnitude was never a private affair. The villagers knew the histories of Scylla and Amoa, they understood the complexities of the land claims, and they recognized the immense pressure both men were under to avoid showing weakness. The community watched, perhaps with a growing sense of dread, as the invisible lines between the two men hardened. They observed the subtle shifts in allegiance, the quiet conversations held out of earshot of the naval authorities, and the steady accumulation of grievances. The presence of the United States Navy, with its courthouse and its armed personnel, offered a theoretical avenue for resolution, but the American legal system was profoundly ill-equipped to navigate the deep, emotional waters of Samoan honor. Taking a dispute of this nature to a foreign court was often seen as an admission of failure, an inability to resolve matters in the traditional, culturally sanctioned manner. Scylla, therefore, was caught in a terrifying paradox. He was living under the jurisdiction of a modern military administration that promised order and law, yet he was bound by an ancient cultural imperative that demanded he defend his family's honor through personal fortitude and unwavering resolve. He could not surrender his claims without facing communal disgrace, and he could not seek resolution through the foreign courts without risking further alienation from the traditions of his people. He was isolated not by geography, but by the overwhelming cultural expectations placed upon him. As the year 1939 progressed, the animosity between Scylla and Amoa mutated from a quiet, simmering resentment into a toxic, volatile force. The dispute ceased to be merely about the land itself and became a contest of ultimate dominance, a situation where the existence of one man's honor seemingly required the complete subjugation of the others. Scylla must have felt the walls of his reality closing in, the inevitable collision drawing closer with each passing day. We must reflect deeply on Scylla as a man defined by the extraordinary pressures of his environment. He was not a statistic in a naval crime ledger. He was a human being tethered to a rich, complex heritage, trying to navigate a world that was rapidly shifting beneath his feet. His life was characterized by a devotion to his lineage, a fierce attachment to the soil of his ancestors, and an unyielding commitment to principles of honor that ultimately placed him in fatal danger. The tragedy of Sella's existence during those final months was the tragic realization that there was no safe harbor. The majestic mountains of Fagatogo offered no refuge from the demands of the FA and the imposing structures of the American naval base offered no protection from the deeply personal, culturally driven rage of his adversary. He was a man standing perfectly still on a collision course, armed only with the burdensome pride of his ancestors. The atmosphere in the village grew increasingly brittle. The daily routines of fishing, tending crops, and navigating the demands of the military administration continued, but they were deeply infected by the looming presence of the feud. For Sella, every footstep outside his home must have carried an undercurrent of vigilance. The beautiful, tropical environment of the island, with its vibrant flora and expansive ocean views, stood in jarring, deeply unsettling contrast to the dark, insular conflict that was consuming his life. The very traditions that had sustained his people for centuries were now acting as the catalyst for his destruction. Sella's story is fundamentally a narrative about the fatal consequences of unresolved cultural friction. It is a poignant exploration of what happens when the profound, emotional ties to land and lineage are pushed to their absolute limits within a confined space. As the fateful day approached, Sella remained steadfast in his position, a tragic figure anchored to his ancestral duties, entirely unaware that the ancient dispute he carried was about to erupt into a sudden, devastating act of violence that would claim his life and permanently alter the history of American Samoa. The transition from long-standing, simmering resentment to a singular, eruptive moment of extreme violence in Fagatogo was not a sudden accident, but a harrowing progression that felt increasingly inevitable to those who witnessed the darkening moods of both men. For Amoa, the man who would eventually carry the weight of the ultimate crime, the environment of the village had become an suffocating enclosure. The internal pressures of his family's honor, the perceived slights regarding land rights, and the constant, nagging presence of Sella within the narrow confines of the village had slowly eroded any capacity for restraint. The traditional ways of settling disputes, which prioritized long-term social cohesion and reconciliation through the mediation of the Matai, were no longer providing the release he sought. Instead, the sense of grievance had become a singular, obsessive focus. Every day spent in Fagatogo was a day spent navigating the proximity of his adversary, a daily reminder of a territorial claim that remained unresolved and a personal status that felt constantly challenged. The psychological isolation that comes with such a fixated, burning hatred is profound, effectively severing a person from the moderating influences of their community. The attack itself, when it finally materialized, was not a hidden act of shadow and stealth, but a direct, brutal confrontation at the very edge of the village. It was a clear, unmitigated expression of the collision that had been building for months. Imoa did not seek to obscure his intent or to find a quiet, secluded space where the act could go unnoticed. His actions were public, visceral, and terrifyingly efficient. The weapon he chose, a heavy, crude implement used for the backbreaking labor of clearing the dense island brush, spoke to the raw, unrefined nature of the rage that had been building within him. This was not a weapon chosen for finesse. It was a tool of immense, crushing force, designed to clear land, and in this horrific instance, it was turned against a fellow human being. The violence of the act was total. Sella, who had been living with the quiet burden of the ongoing feud, suddenly found himself facing the absolute, physical manifestation of Amoa's fury. The transition from the routine of village life to the finality of a violent, public death was instantaneous, shattering the collective sense of security that held the community together. The site of the attack, located at the periphery of Fagatogo, became an instant focal point for the entire village. This was not just a crime scene, it was the site of a profound cultural rupture. The brutality of the murder, the fact that it was carried out in the open, with such disregard for the sanctity of life or the traditional codes of conduct, sent shockwaves through every household. In a society where connections were everything, a public, violent death was an affront to the entire community. It was a tearing of the fabric that defined their social order. The witnesses to the aftermath of the event would have been confronted with a reality that was difficult to process, A man dead in the dirt, the brutal implement of his demise discarded, and the perpetrator, Imoa, standing within the immediate aftermath of his irreversible act. The shock would have been compounded by the knowledge that this had been a long-simmering dispute, a known quantity that everyone had watched but no one had successfully resolved. The silence that must have fallen over that specific patch of land in Fagatogo following the incident would have been heavy with the weight of the disaster. The immediate reaction to the violence was governed by the complex interplay between traditional social structures and the encroaching presence of the naval administration. Because the murder had been committed so brazenly, and because the victim was a member of a prominent lineage, the incident could not be contained or quietly mediated through the usual channels of family arbitration. The authority of the United States Navy, which had been observing the village with a combination of detachment and firm control, was instantly galvanized. For the naval officers, the murder was not just a personal tragedy, it was a breach of the order they had imposed upon the territory. It was a direct challenge to the supremacy of their legal code and a test of their ability to maintain control in a land they considered a strategic outpost. The swift mobilization of the military to secure the scene, collect evidence, and take Imoa into custody was a demonstration of the power dynamic that existed at the time. They did not wait for the traditional leaders to intervene. They arrived with the efficiency and the detached, clinical approach of a military force that viewed the crime through the lens of protocol and discipline. As the authorities took charge of the scene, the people of Fagatogo were relegated to the position of observers in their own village. The transformation of the incident into a naval legal matter was a significant moment. It signaled the total displacement of the traditional, restorative justice methods that would have normally guided the response to such a conflict. The investigation was not conducted by elders or mediators seeking to repair the damage to the community. It was conducted by naval personnel focused on the establishment of facts, the documentation of the crime, and the building of a case for the tribunal. This shift in the procedural response to the murder served to further intensify the feeling of profound displacement among the residents. The tragedy was no longer theirs to resolve. It had been absorbed into the machinery of the foreign administration. The collection of evidence, the statements taken from those who had witnessed the immediate aftermath, and the physical examination of the site were all conducted according to the dictates of an American military manual, creating a stark distance between the emotional reality of the village and the clinical requirements of the law. Imoa, meanwhile, was moved from the familiar setting of his home and village into the sterile, intimidating environment of the naval detention facility. This transition, from the social world of his ancestors to the regimented cell of a foreign military power, would have been a profoundly disorienting experience. Deprived of the support of his family and the familiar context of the Amati, he was left to face the full, unyielding weight of the legal apparatus that he had so violently challenged. The investigators, operating with the clear objective of securing a conviction for first-degree murder, would have been focused on establishing the elements of the crime, the intent, the preparation, and the brutal execution. Every conversation, every detail of the days leading up to the attack would have been scrutinized, stripped of its cultural nuance, and converted into evidence. The complexities of the land dispute, which were the driving force behind the tragedy, would have been reduced to a simple, legalistic motive, a reason for a planned, intentional act of violence. The community of Fagatogo watched this process with a mix of dread and resignation. They understood that the outcome would be severe. The presence of the naval court, with its power to command both life and death, left very little room for ambiguity regarding the ultimate fate of the accused. The traditional role of the family in protecting its members and seeking reconciliation had been completely sidelined. The legal process, as it unfolded in the days after the murder, was a testament to the absolute authority the Navy held over the lives of the people of American Samoa. For the survivors of Sela, the legal process offered a form of justice that was alien to their traditions, yet it was the only form of justice that was being offered. The loss of a family member, the trauma of the public attack, and the sight of the perpetrator being processed by the machinery of the military tribunal created a sense of collective exhaustion. The village had been the setting for a catastrophe, and the aftermath of that catastrophe was being dictated by forces that felt both overwhelming and profoundly detached from the local experience. Throughout this period of investigation, the atmosphere in Fagatogo remained thick with the tension of the preceding months. The memory of the attack, the sight of the weapon, and the abrupt removal of Amoa left a mark on the collective consciousness of the village. The investigation served as a slow, methodical reconstruction of the tragedy, forcing everyone to relive the details of the incident. It was an agonizing period, a time during which the community had to confront the reality of their failure to prevent the violence. The fact that the murder had been committed with such raw, unadorned brutality only added to the sense of collective guilt and shame. Every day that the naval officers spent in the village, gathering their records and finalizing their reports, was a reminder of the collapse of their traditional order. The investigators, focused on the rigid, binary logic of their own laws, likely had little understanding of the deep, historical context of the land dispute and even less inclination to factor it into their final assessment. Their task was simply to prove the crime, and in that, they were operating with a ruthless, clinical efficiency that offered no space for the complexity of the human experience that had led to the bloodshed. As the investigation concluded and the formal charges were prepared, the shadow of the naval court grew long over Fagatogo, signaling the arrival of a final judgment that would have consequences far beyond the immediate circle of the victim and the accused. The tragedy was no longer an isolated event. It had been codified, formalized, and placed firmly within the hands of a military authority that was preparing to demonstrate the full extent of its power, ensuring that the ending of the story would be as final and as chilling as the act of violence that had brought it into existence. The formal legal proceedings that followed the brutal murder in Fagatogo were characterized by an overwhelming sense of procedural gravity, as the United States Navy transformed a deeply personal, culturally fraught tragedy into a sterile demonstration of martial law. The trial, held under the auspices of the territorial court, was a stark, uncompromising affair that stripped away the complexities of ancestral land disputes and the delicate nuances of the FAMITI system, reducing the events to a linear narrative of premeditated crime. For the presiding officers of the court, the objective was not to understand the social currents that had driven Amoa to violence, but to affirm the absolute dominance of the American legal structure over the territory. The courtroom, situated within the military station, was a space of rigid order, where the informal but deeply felt traditions of the island were effectively rendered irrelevant. Amoa, removed from the familiarity of his kin, found himself in a hostile environment where every gesture, every piece of evidence, and every testimony was filtered through a legal framework that demanded a singular, binary interpretation of his actions. The prosecution's case was built with the meticulous, detached precision one would expect from a military command. They focused intently on the elements of first-degree murder, meticulously cataloging the nature of the weapon, the lack of any immediate provocation that would legally justify such extreme violence, and the evidence indicating that the act had been born of a settled, long-standing intent. For the naval officers tasked with the prosecution, the dispute between Amoa and Sella was not a narrative of conflicting ancestral duties, but a simple, damning case of a man who had chosen to resolve a disagreement by taking a life. They painted a picture of a calculated, brutal attack, emphasizing the sheer ferocity of the assault and the vulnerability of the victim. This framing effectively erased the context of the struggle that had consumed the two men for months, presenting Amoa not as a tragic figure caught in a cultural crossfire, but as a dangerous individual whose actions necessitated the most severe of interventions. Throughout the trial, the lack of resonance between the court's logic and the reality of the Samoan experience was palpable. The traditional efforts at reconciliation, the complex, time-honored rituals of apology, known as ioga, that might have allowed the families to address the wrong and mitigate the cycle of violence, were treated by the court as historical footnotes rather than legitimate components of justice. The families of both the victim and the accused, bound by their traditions, had sought to engage in these rituals, hoping to restore balance and prevent the permanent loss of another life. They viewed the dispute as something to be healed through public acknowledgement and collective repair. However, the Navy rejected these appeals with a detached, bureaucratic finality. To the administrators, Allowing the traditional methods of justice to supersede the formal penal code would be a failure of their duty to maintain law and order. By rejecting the pleas for mercy, they were not just sentencing a man, they were asserting the supremacy of their system over the ancient, community-based structures of the islands. The defense, to the extent that it was possible within the restrictive, alien environment of the Naval Tribunal, struggled to articulate the profound weight of the pressures Samoa had been under. They attempted to contextualize the crime, to speak to the deep-seated grievances over land and the suffocating cultural mandates of honor that had forced his hand. Yet, these arguments fell on the ears of men whose primary allegiance was to the letter of the law and the maintenance of a disciplined, orderly territory. To them, the motivations, no matter how deeply rooted in culture, could not excuse the deliberate taking of a human life. The trial was a slow, agonizing process for the community, which had to witness the dismantling of their traditional societal norms in favor of a rigid, foreign system of retribution. The outcome seemed destined from the moment the formal charges were brought, as the Navy viewed a guilty verdict as an essential component of its authority. The verdict of guilty for first-degree murder was delivered with a somber, terrifying finality. The sentence, a decree of death by hanging, was not merely a punishment. It was a profound, symbolic act. The judges, acting as the ultimate instruments of the territorial government, chose the most extreme, irreversible penalty to send an unequivocal message to every resident of the island chain. The penalty was meant to signify that the era of traditional, blood-based conflict resolution was over, and that in its place, the state now held the absolute power to determine the final consequence of transgression. As the judgment was read, the weight of it would have pressed heavily upon the courtroom, signaling a permanent change in the legal reality of American Samoa. The community's hope for a restorative conclusion was shattered, replaced by the stark realization that the foreign administration would not be swayed by tradition or plea. In the aftermath of the conviction, the period leading up to the execution became an agonizing interlude. The administrative apparatus of the military moved with an efficient, cold-blooded rhythm to finalize the preparations for the hanging. There was no hesitation, no reprieve, and no reconsideration of the plea for a sentence of life imprisonment. The decision to proceed with the execution was a deliberate exercise of power, a choice to ensure that the law was not just upheld, but felt. This period of waiting was a time of immense, quiet trauma for the people of Fagatogo. They watched as the preparations were made, as the bureaucratic requirements were fulfilled, and as the inevitability of the death became a cold, hard fact of their daily lives. The distance between the administrators and the people they governed had never felt wider. The language of the law, which had once been a distant, academic concept, now possessed a sharp, cutting edge that threatened to sever one of their own from their world forever. The defense had made their final attempts at appeals, citing the cultural context and the possibilities of traditional restitution, but these efforts were summarily dismissed. The naval governor, as the final authority, had already made his determination. He saw the execution as a necessary step for the pacification of the territory and the solidification of the American legal structure. He was not interested in the nuances of Polynesian societal history. He was interested in the stability of a strategic naval outpost. This uncompromising position left no space for the survival of the individual who had committed the crime. The legal machinery, once set in motion, operated with a relentless, inexorable force that could not be redirected by any amount of communal grief or traditional argument. As the date of the execution approached, the village of Fagatogo became a place of profound, unsettling anticipation. The event was to be public, intended as a spectacle of authority. The decision to make it so was perhaps the most controversial and lasting aspect of the entire ordeal. By forcing the community to witness the hanging, the authorities were attempting to imprint the power of the state directly onto the memory of the residents. They wanted to ensure that the memory of the event would be so painful, so visceral, and so final that it would serve as an effective, permanent deterrent against future acts of extreme violence. This, however, was a profound miscalculation of the emotional impact of such a spectacle. Instead of fostering a clean, respectful fear of the law, the public hangings served to etch a deep, festering resentment into the collective psyche of the people. It created a dark, enduring scar that would influence the cultural perception of justice for generations to come. In these final days before the execution, the community was forced to grapple with a level of powerlessness that was entirely new to their experience. The structure of their lives, which had survived the arrival of ships and the construction of bases, was now being physically challenged by the absolute, terminal authority of the naval court. The death of Amoa was not just the end of a man, it was the symbolic conclusion of a specific mode of existence. The lawyers, the guards, and the administrators who moved through the village during this time existed in a separate, insulated world, untouched by the mourning and the quiet, persistent despair that had descended upon the households of Fagatogo. They were performing their duties with the detached professionalism of those who believed themselves to be on the right side of history, completely oblivious to the cultural rift they were widening with every step toward the final day. The story of the prosecution, the conviction, and the sentencing is a chilling reminder of the disconnect between a system of law that is imposed from the outside and the people who live within its shadow. It is a story about the failure to bridge the gap between two worlds, resulting in a tragedy that destroyed two lives and forever altered the social fabric of an entire territory. The legal process, which should have been a tool for resolution, became a weapon of dominance, leaving a legacy of bitterness that would echo through the history of American Samoa long after the gallows themselves had been dismantled and abandoned. The trial was the final act of a social tragedy, and the verdict was the inevitable conclusion to a misunderstanding that had escalated into a catastrophe of monumental proportions. With the final arrangements made and the date set, the community was left only to witness the final, irreversible demonstration of the power that had governed their lives with such unyielding, clinical detachment. The morning of November 24, 1939, dawned with an oppressive stillness over Fagatogo, a day that would be forever etched into the collective memory of the territory as the moment when the foreign machinery of justice claimed its final, chilling victory. The gallows had been constructed with a grim, utilitarian efficiency within the administrative heart of the naval station, a looming timber structure that stood in jarring, grotesque contrast to the tropical beauty of the harbor and the lush, verdant mountains that cradled the village. This was no private, quiet affair hidden behind stone walls. It was a deliberately public, calculated spectacle of power. The naval administration had decreed that the execution of Amoa would be seen, intending for the event to serve as a definitive, visceral lesson in the reach and the uncompromising nature of the American law that had been transplanted onto their islands. Every aspect of the preparation was handled with the cold, precise movements of personnel who believed they were performing a duty of absolute necessity, entirely detached from the profound emotional trauma they were inflicting upon the community that lived just beyond the base's fences. As the sun rose higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the clearing where the gallows stood, the atmosphere in Fagatogo became thick with a palpable, suffocating dread. Families had gathered in their fail, maintaining a solemn, heavy silence that spoke volumes of their shared despair. There was no joy, no sense of righteous closure, and no belief that what was about to happen represented a healing of the community. Instead, there was a profound, collective mourning, a recognition that the social order they had cherished was being forcibly overridden. The naval authorities, seeking to ensure that their message was clearly understood, had invited, and in some cases mandated the presence of indigenous leaders to witness the proceedings. This was a tactical maneuver intended to force the traditional Matai to confront the new reality of power, to witness the humiliation and the ultimate extinction of one of their own at the hands of the colonial administration. It was a moment of supreme, calculated dominance that left little room for the subtle, traditional displays of dignity or reconciliation that might otherwise have marked the conclusion of a life in the Samoan culture. The walk to the gallows, short as it was, likely felt like an eternity for those forced to watch, and certainly for the man whose life was being brought to its forced, mechanical end. Amoa, stripped of his community, his family, and his context, stood alone against the might of the military state. The observers, a mix of naval officers, sailors, and the summoned village leaders, created a stark, segregated landscape around the structure. The Navy men carried themselves with a rigid, practiced decorum, their uniforms sharp and their eyes fixed on the requirements of the procedure, while the local witnesses carried the heavy, stoic, and deeply pained expression of a people who had been rendered powerless in their own home. The air felt thin and static, charged with the immense, agonizing friction between the two worlds that were colliding in that small, designated space. The sight of the rope, the trapdoor, and the men standing ready to perform their function was a reality so harsh and so alien that it felt almost impossible to reconcile with the life they had led just days before. The silence that preceded the final moment was not a peaceful silence. It was a weighted, suffocating vacuum. It was the sound of a community being forced to accept an outcome they had fought against and that they fundamentally rejected as an imposition of foreign cruelty. The execution itself, when it finally occurred, was carried out with the clinical, unhurried pace of a procedure that had been practiced to perfection. There was no emotion in the hands of the men who operated the lever, no hesitation in the voice of the officer who gave the command, and no mercy in the final, sickening thud of the trapdoor as it swung open. It was an act of pure, mechanical finality that silenced the man, silenced the debate, and silenced the traditional attempts at mercy that had been building since the day of the murder. The suddenness of it, the absolute disruption of the rhythm of life in Fagatogo, left everyone who witnessed it reeling in a state of profound, psychological shock. It was the violent, physical punctuation mark on a long, arduous process of legal domination. In the immediate aftermath of the hanging, the scene was one of grim, controlled order. The naval officers moved with practiced efficiency to remove the body, to secure the area, and to disperse the witnesses. They did not linger to offer comfort, nor did they wait to hear the thoughts of the leaders who had been forced to witness the event. Their task was completed, their demonstration of power had been successfully performed, and they moved on to their next administrative duty as if they had not just participated in the final, catastrophic breaking of a local social order. For the people of Fagatogo, however, the day was far from over. The trauma of the event would linger in their hearts and minds for years, becoming the foundation for a new, deeply cynical understanding of their relationship with the governing naval administration. The spectacle, which the Navy had intended to be a deterrent, had backfired in the most profound way possible. It did not create a clean, obedient fear of the law. It created a deep, festering, and enduring resentment that would forever color the way the islanders viewed the presence and the authority of the United States. The journey back to the village for the witnesses would have been a walk through a landscape that now felt irrevocably changed. The familiar paths, the trees, and the ocean view were the same, but the reality behind them had shifted into something darker and more cynical. They carried with them the memory of the rope, the trap, and the cold, unyielding face of the military authority. The death of Amoa was not just the end of an individual. It was a traumatic, public severing of the link between the people and the justice they understood. The traditional methods of Ioga, the public apology, and the restorative rituals that might have allowed for a degree of emotional closure and communal healing were completely eclipsed by the memory of the hanging. The state had not merely punished a criminal, it had performed a surgery on the soul of the community, and the patient had been left permanently scarred by the experience. As the news of the execution spread through the island chain, the collective shock turned into a quiet but potent resolve. The event became a legend, a grim story passed down through the generations, ensuring that no one in American Samoa would ever forget the price that had been paid for the uncompromising nature of the foreign rule. The gallows were eventually dismantled, the wood taken down, and the area returned to its usual function, but the ghost of that day never truly departed from the administrative center of Fagatogo. It remained in the atmosphere, a silent reminder of the time when the state had taken the power of life and death into its own hands and had wielded it with a detachment that had left a permanent, unhealable wound. The people of Fagatogo were left to manage their own grief, to navigate their own recovery, and to find a way forward in a world where the law was something that was done to them, rather than something that belonged to them. This final, public act of violence by the Navy had achieved a sort of paradoxical outcome. By demonstrating the absolute, terminal power of the state, they had effectively signaled the end of their own legitimacy in the eyes of many of the local residents. The execution, intended as a show of strength, was in reality a testament to a fundamental, irreconcilable failure of cultural empathy. The administration had prioritized the assertion of its own power over the integrity of the people it governed, and in doing so, they had alienated the very population they were meant to serve. The legacy of November 24, 1939, would be one of enduring skepticism and a profound, quiet defiance that would define the political and social consciousness of the territory for decades to come. As the sun set over Fagatogo on that long, terrible day, the era of the gallows had effectively drawn to a close, not through an act of legislative reform, but through the weight of the moral disaster that had been created by the finality of the state's own hand. The village would move forward, but it would never be the same again. The execution of Amoa did not simply conclude the criminal proceedings of a single, tragic case. It acted as a profound, irrevocable pivot point in the social and legal evolution of American Samoa. The chilling efficiency of that morning on November 24, 1939, served as a catalyst for a long, silent transformation that would eventually render the territory a de facto abolitionist society. While the naval authorities intended the hanging to be a display of overwhelming, absolute authority that would cow the populace into total compliance, the long-term reality proved to be precisely the opposite. Instead of solidifying a permanent reliance on the ultimate penalty as a tool of governance, the experience left an indelible scar on the collective psyche of the territory, creating an enduring, visceral distaste for the exercise of state-sanctioned lethal force. The memory of that day, passed down through families and communal narratives, became a foundational element of a local legal culture that prioritized the preservation of life and the restoration of social harmony over the sterile, mechanical finality of the gallows. As the years progressed, particularly following the critical transition of administrative power in 1951 from the United States Navy to the Department of the Interior, the legal landscape began to shift in a more civilian-oriented direction. This movement away from direct military rule allowed for the slow but steady erosion of the draconian sentencing practices that had characterized the preceding decades. Judges, lawmakers, and community leaders, many of whom were deeply influenced by the stories and the lingering trauma of the 1939 hanging, began to consciously pivot away from the death penalty as an acceptable instrument of justice. The transition was not instantaneous, nor was it marked by a singular, celebratory legislative act, but rather by a consistent, collective avoidance of the ultimate sanction. This de facto abolition of the death penalty was a powerful, silent testimony to the community's refusal to allow the state to ever again claim a life in their name, effectively turning the tragedy of Amoa into a permanent, guiding lesson for the future of the territory. The legacy of the Amoa case is profoundly interwoven with the enduring resilience of the Fa'amatai system and the broader, more conciliatory traditions of the Samoan people. Even as the American legal framework became more entrenched and the territory became increasingly integrated into the federal system of the United States, the indigenous values of healing, reconciliation, and the restoration of family dignity continued to exert a powerful, moderating influence on the application of justice. The failure of the naval court to recognize these values had resulted in an unnecessary, catastrophic loss of life and a profound disruption of the community's social fabric. By turning away from the death penalty, the leaders and the people of American Samoa were, in essence, reclaiming the restorative power that had been denied to them in 1939. They were choosing a path that emphasized the complexity of human life and the possibility of redemption, standing in sharp, quiet contrast to the cold, binary logic that had once been imposed upon them by an occupying naval force. In the contemporary era, American Samoa operates as a place where the sanctity of life is held with a level of cultural and legal reverence that is starkly different from the brutal, clinical indifference of that long-ago day in Fagatogo. The current legal system, while still functioning under the broader umbrella of American jurisprudence, has effectively rendered the death penalty an obsolete relic of an era when the islanders had no voice in their own governance. Today, when the justice system is confronted with the most serious and unforgivable of crimes, it turns not to the rope or the lethal injection, but to the reality of permanent imprisonment. This approach, while also undeniably harsh, avoids the permanent, irreversible destruction of a human life, maintaining a moral boundary that the community has collectively decided not to cross. This evolution is the direct, if largely unacknowledged, inheritance of the tragedy that ended the life of Amoa. It is a silent, ongoing act of communal defiance against the legacy of the naval gallows. The reflection on this history forces us to confront the persistent, unsettling truth that justice is not merely a product of the law, but a reflection of the culture and the humanity of the people who enforce it. The tragedy of 1939 was a failure of this humanity, a moment when the law was divorced from the lived experience of the community, resulting in a trauma that took generations to begin to process. As we consider the trajectory of this story, from the simmering, ancestral tensions of Fagatogo to the absolute, crushing silence of the hanging, we see how easily a system can lose its way when it prioritizes power over empathy. The fact that American Samoa has successfully moved beyond this dark chapter is a testament to the enduring, quiet power of a society to learn from its most painful lessons and to carve out a path that is more reflective of its own values and its own history. The gallows are long gone, the timber has rotted, and the men who stood in those uniforms are long buried, but the choice made by the survivors to never repeat that act remains a vital, active component of the territory's identity. This narrative, which began with the collision of two worlds, ends with the realization that the most profound justice is that which seeks to maintain the cohesion of the community rather than to destroy its members. The story of Amoa and Sela is, at its heart, a story about the devastating cost of a cultural divide that was managed with a lack of understanding and an overabundance of force. The legal evolution of American Samoa from 1939 to the present day serves as a powerful, necessary counterpoint to the events of that fateful year. It illustrates the capacity of a people to take the wreckage of an imposed history and to build from it a legal culture that, while imperfect and constantly evolving, strives to uphold the dignity of life. The territory has effectively moved from being a place where the state exercised the ultimate, cold-blooded authority of the scaffold to a place where that authority is held in check by a collective, historical memory of what happens when such power is left unchecked. As we look back at the history of Fagatogo, we are reminded that the true record of any society is not found in its statutes or its formal decrees, but in the choices its people make in the aftermath of their greatest tragedies. The decision to abandon the death penalty was not an easy one, nor was it arrived at through the simple passing of a law. It was an arduous, generational process of reclaiming their own moral agency in the face of an institutional history that had once sought to define them through the violent performance of the state's dominance. The legacy of the Amoa case is therefore not just the story of a crime and its punishment, but the story of a territory's emergence from the shadow of the gallows into a future where the preservation of life has become an essential, non-negotiable value. It is a story of quiet, persistent survival and the slow, steady reclamation of a culture that had once been forced to its knees. The finality of the hanging in 1939 was meant to be the end of the narrative, a definitive silencing of the conflict and a permanent demonstration of control. Yet, in a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit and the enduring power of community memory, it became the beginning of a different, more resilient story. The silence that fell over Fagatogo that day was not the silence of compliance, but the silence of a people who had seen the absolute limit of what they would ever allow the state to do. They took that memory and folded it into their history, ensuring that the lesson would never be lost. Today, the village of Fagatogo and the territory of American Samoa remain a place where the modern world and the ancient traditions continue to intersect, but they do so now with the benefit of a hard-won perspective that recognizes the immense, irreparable value of every single life. The tragedy of 1939 remains a somber, cautionary tale, but it is one that has served to illuminate the path forward, ensuring that the shadow of the rope will never again darken their shores. The legacy is one of survival, wisdom, and a collective, unshakable commitment to the idea that there is always and must always be a better way than the one that led to the final, chilling act on that November morning. The final echoes of the Emoa case do not resonate merely as a historical footnote in the annals of American naval administration, but as a persistent, foundational heartbeat within the modern legal identity of American Samoa. To reflect upon the journey from that grim morning in November 1939 to the present day is to acknowledge the profound weight of an unresolved, ancestral trauma that eventually transmuted into a collective moral anchor. The transition of the territory from a place where a naval governor held the absolute, unchecked power to execute to a community that has firmly rejected such a practice is not a narrative of linear progress or simple bureaucratic reform. It is, instead, a story of an enduring, quiet struggle to reconcile the imposition of a foreign legal architecture with the resilient, deeply embedded cultural values of a people who have always found their strength in the interconnectedness of their families and the sanctity of their traditions. The gallows, once the ultimate symbol of an alien and uncompromising authority, have long since been reduced to a dark memory, a ghost of an era that the territory has consciously and deliberately distanced itself from, ensuring that the heavy, suffocating silence of that execution day would never again be the prevailing atmosphere in their home. The transformation of the territory into a de facto abolitionist society remains one of the most significant, yet frequently understated, aspects of its 20th century development. While the legal codes of many jurisdictions are defined by the active implementation of statutes, the legal identity of American Samoa has been forged through a consistent, collective, and silent consensus, a shared understanding that the taking of a life by the state is fundamentally incompatible with their sense of humanity and their commitment to restorative justice. This consensus, which has persisted for nearly 9 decades, is the true, living legacy of the Emoa case. It is a testament to the way in which a community can take a moment of absolute, state-sponsored brutality and, over generations, process that pain until it becomes a permanent moral boundary. The administration of justice in the territory today, while still complex and influenced by the broader American legal tradition, is fundamentally shaped by this deep-seated, historical skepticism toward the death penalty, ensuring that even when faced with the most horrific of circumstances, the judicial system operates within the parameters of a society that has decided, collectively, that there is no space for the scaffold. When we consider the lives of Sela and Emoa, we must recognize that their individual tragedy has become the vessel for a much larger, more enduring conversation about the nature of justice and the cost of cultural collision. Their story is a sobering reminder that every legal system, no matter how sophisticated or how powerful it may appear, is inherently limited by its ability to perceive and respect the deep, human truths that exist beyond its own narrow, procedural definitions. The naval officers who oversaw the execution believed they were doing their duty. They were following the law as they understood it, applying the rules of their institution to the facts of the case. Yet, by failing to see the men as products of a history they were not a part of, and by failing to understand the traditional systems that could have potentially resolved the conflict, they created a catastrophe of irreversible proportions. The modern legal framework of American Samoa, by contrast, operates with the benefit of this historical experience, maintaining a cautious, thoughtful approach that strives to be more cognizant of the human, social, and cultural contexts in which crimes occur, even as it maintains its commitment to the rule of law. The endurance of the FA system through these decades of legal and political transition is equally remarkable, serving as a constant, stabilizing force that has allowed the community to bridge the gap between its ancient roots and the requirements of a modern society. The resilience of the chiefly titles and the family organizations has allowed for a level of social cohesion that has proved essential in the aftermath of the most severe challenges. Even when the legal system imposed from the outside was at its most aggressive, the strength of these traditional bonds provided a reservoir of collective identity that prevented the total assimilation or disintegration of the community. Today, the interplay between the formal law and the informal, deeply valued traditions of the islands creates a unique legal landscape where the spirit of the law and the heart of the culture are in a constant, delicate, and often successful dialogue. This dialogue is what prevents the return of the sort of absolute, detached violence that defined the events of 1939. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the Amoa case remain as vital and as relevant as they were on that day of the execution. The world continues to evolve. The pressures of modernity continue to exert themselves on the islands, and the legal challenges faced by the territory continue to grow in complexity. Yet, the commitment to the preservation of life stands as a cornerstone of the societal identity, a pillar that supports the continued stability and dignity of the people. This commitment is not a static set of rules. It is an active, ongoing effort to maintain the humanity of their justice system in an often indifferent and sometimes unforgiving world. The memory of the gallows serves as a constant, quiet sentinel, reminding every generation of the price of the alternatives and the profound, enduring value of their own collective choices. The territory has not merely survived its history, it has learned to interpret and to utilize that history as a compass for its own, self-determined path. The significance of the Fagatogo tragedy is ultimately found in the way it has been integrated into the identity of the people. It is no longer a wound that festers in the darkness, but a story that is told with the gravity and the respect that such a history requires. By refusing to let the death of Amoa be the final word on their legal and moral character, the people of American Samoa have engaged in an act of persistent, transformative resilience. They have shown that while they cannot change the actions of the past, they can dictate the significance of those actions for the future. The gallows were a symbol of an ending, but the aftermath has been one of a long, slow, and meaningful beginning. The territory has moved forward, not by erasing the past, but by holding it up as a mirror to ensure that the values they hold dear, their connections, their respect for history, and their commitment to restorative justice, are never again obscured by the imposition of a cold, foreign force. As this chronicle reaches its conclusion, it is clear that the story of Amoa and Sela is far more than a simple narrative of crime and punishment. It is a profound, expansive, and deeply moving reflection on the capacity of a people to define their own destiny, to reject the violence that was once forced upon them, and to craft a society that is fundamentally grounded in a rejection of the finality of death as a form of justice. The lasting legacy of that tragic, public mourning is the quiet, unbreakable peace of the decades that have followed, a peace that is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of a collective, shared understanding of what it means to live in a community. The territory of American Samoa remains a beacon of this understanding, a place where the memory of the gallows serves to illuminate the deep, intrinsic value of every single life, and where the echoes of the past serve only to strengthen the resolve of the present to walk a path that is marked by dignity, resilience, and a profound, unshakable humanity. The story that began in the heart of Fagatogo in the late 1930s has traveled through the decades to reach this final, quiet, and meaningful conclusion, proving that the human spirit, when supported by the bonds of community and the wisdom of history, will always find a way to transcend even the most devastating of impositions. The gallows have left the stage, but the lesson, the memory, and the enduring commitment of the people remain, as vibrant and as vital as the islands themselves, a lasting testament to the strength that is found in the choice to value life above all else. The concluding resonance of the tragedy in Fagatogo serves as more than just a historical marker. It functions as a permanent, cautionary compass for the legal and social consciousness of American Samoa. To understand the depth of this conclusion, one must appreciate how a community, once fractured by an imposed, lethal force, systematically rebuilt its moral framework to ensure that no future generation would bear the burden of such an institutionalized catastrophe. The absence of the death penalty within the territory is not merely a legal quirk or a passive state of affairs. It is an active, ongoing expression of a hard-won wisdom derived from the darkest moment in their collective experience. The memory of the gallows has been transformed from a source of immediate, visceral terror into a quiet, enduring sentinel of societal ethics. This sentinel watches over the islands, reminding the populace and its leaders alike that the machinery of justice, when stripped of empathy and detached from the intricate, human-centered values of the community, inevitably leads to a dehumanizing outcome that leaves everyone diminished. The process of de facto abolition in American Samoa represents a sophisticated evolution of societal self-determination. It suggests that the most effective legal norms are not always those mandated by the highest central authorities, but those that emerge from the lived, painful reality of the people themselves. By choosing, decade after decade, to withhold the final sanction of execution, the territory has effectively reclaimed its right to define what justice means on its own terms. This shift is a silent, revolutionary act. It challenges the conventional view that justice is something that must be meted out with a calculated, corresponding intensity. Instead, it proposes that the highest form of justice is one that acknowledges the profound, restorative potential of human life, even in the wake of the most grievous of wrongs. This moral pivot, born in the aftermath of Amoa's death, has provided the community with a unique, protective identity that distinguishes it within the broader, more punitive landscape of the American legal system. The ongoing vitality of the FA-Amati system serves as the bedrock upon which this principled stance is maintained. It provides a constant, cultural anchor, reminding the residents that they are part of a larger, multi-generational narrative that values the integrity of the family and the sanctity of the land. In this framework, crime is never an isolated, individual act, but a rupture in the harmony of the extended group, and the response to that crime must be centered on healing the rupture rather than simply discarding the offender. This cultural approach is inherently at odds with the sterile, binary logic of the 1939 Naval Court, and its persistence throughout the modern era is evidence of a society that has successfully integrated its ancient values into the complex requirements of contemporary governance. The dialogue between the formal law and the traditional, restorative instincts of the people is what allows the territory to navigate the pressures of modern life without losing its soul. It is a fragile, dynamic balance, but one that has proven remarkably durable. Looking toward the horizon of the territory's future, the legacy of the Fagatogo tragedy remains a beacon of moral clarity. As the region continues to engage with the global community and faces the inevitable shifts in political and social dynamics, the commitment to life remains a constant, non-negotiable principle. It is a principle that has been tested, refined, and solidified through the passage of time. The people of American Samoa carry the weight of their history with a quiet, dignified resolve, ensuring that the lessons learned from the sacrifice and the suffering of the past continue to inform their path forward. They have demonstrated that a society does not have to be defined by its greatest tragedies, but rather by the grace and the wisdom it exercises in the years that follow. The absence of the death penalty is not an indication of a lack of gravity regarding serious crime. Rather, it is a testament to the belief that the state's power should be constrained by a fundamental respect for the human condition. The story of the hanging in 1939 has been thoroughly analyzed, mourned, and eventually integrated into the cultural heritage of the islands. It stands as a reminder of the fragility of peace and the danger of power when it is exercised in isolation from the community. Yet, it also stands as a testament to the power of memory. By keeping the story alive, by passing it down as a living narrative, the community ensures that they never drift back toward the darkness of that November day. The story has lost its power to paralyze the community. Instead, it has gained the power to instruct, to warn, and to guide. It is a story that has been stripped of its ability to define their current reality, but remains essential to the preservation of their values. The resilience shown by the people in navigating this history is nothing short of heroic, reflecting a quiet, persistent strength that has allowed them to define their own destiny against the currents of an external, often overwhelming, history. As we bring this detailed exploration to its final close, we are left with a profound sense of the transformative power of a community's choices. The narrative began in a place of deep, unresolved grievance, moved through a cataclysm of state-sponsored violence, and concluded in a long, ongoing era of deliberate, principled restraint. It is a trajectory that speaks to the highest aspirations of a society, to learn from the past, to honor the victims of that past, and to build a future that is fundamentally, irrevocably committed to the protection of life. The territory of American Samoa stands today not as a relic of the naval era, but as a modern, self-aware society that has successfully charted its own course. The silence that once marked the execution ground has been replaced by the active, vibrant hum of a community that understands its own value and is determined to uphold it. The story of Amoa and Sela is finally and firmly at rest, its purpose served as a guide for the living. The final, lasting impact of this history is the assurance that no matter the challenges faced, the people of the islands remain anchored by their commitment to a better, more humane way of life. The tragedy was once a wall, an insurmountable barrier that threatened the future of the community. Today, it is a foundation, a starting point from which they have built a society that, while still facing its own modern difficulties, does so with the clarity and the moral weight of their historical experience. They are the architects of their own moral universe, a universe where the rope and the scaffold have been left in the dustbin of a history they have survived and transcended. Their identity, woven from the threads of ancient tradition and hard-won, contemporary wisdom, stands as a quiet, powerful testament to the idea that a society's greatest strength lies in its capacity to choose mercy, to prioritize understanding, and to cherish the potential of every human life. In this concluding realization, the shadow that once fell over Fagatogo is fully dispelled, replaced by a clarity that honors the past while remaining resolutely focused on the preservation of a dignified future. The lessons are clear, the history is acknowledged, and the commitment of the people remains unshakable. The islands of American Samoa continue to navigate their way through the complexities of the modern world, guided by the light of a long-standing, collective decision to move beyond the violence of their history. The story ends not with a resolution of the crime or a justification for the punishment, but with the quiet, persistent affirmation of the community's right to determine its own path. It is a narrative of profound growth, of a community that has found its voice and has used that voice to articulate a vision of justice that is, above all else, rooted in the enduring, life-affirming values that have guided their people for generations. The legacy is secure, the resolve is firm, and the future, as always, rests in the hands of those who remember the past but are no longer haunted by it, walking forward into a time where their deepest commitment is to the dignity and the life of one another. The historical arc of the Amoa case, while rooted in a specific, violent episode in the late 1930s, radiates far beyond the confines of Fagatogo, offering a timeless meditation on the fragile nature of justice in the shadow of colonial administration. To look back at the finality of that November day in 1939 is to witness a collision between the cold, rigid mechanics of military governance and the complex, emotive rhythms of a deeply established, communal society. The hanging of Amoa was not an isolated incident of crime and punishment. It was a demonstration of a power that viewed the indigenous culture as an obstacle to be bypassed rather than a context to be understood. The persistence of the memory of this event as a defining moral landmark in the history of American Samoa demonstrates that a community's identity is often forged in the crucible of its most painful experiences. The transition from a state of enforced compliance to a state of collective, principled restraint has been the territory's most significant social achievement, one that was not gifted by the administrators but claimed by the people through their enduring commitment to never repeat the mistake of the scaffold. The ongoing relevance of this history within the modern context of American Samoa is reflected in how the territory manages its legal and social affairs with an underlying, pervasive skepticism of the most extreme penalties. While the legal systems of other territories or the federal government of the United States have fluctuated in their application of capital punishment, American Samoa has maintained a remarkably consistent, quiet stance, a testament to the fact that the trauma of the past has been internalized as a permanent, protective barrier. This boundary, which prevents the state from ever again employing the rope or the trapdoor, is not merely a legal restriction. It is a cultural and moral conviction that has been refined through decades of observation and quiet, communal reflection. By keeping the memory of the tragedy alive, the people have ensured that the lesson is not abstract, but deeply connected to their own understanding of what it means to live in a society that respects the sanctity of life above the demands of an impersonal, retributive justice. Furthermore, the longevity of this moral stance reveals a deep-seated, indigenous understanding of the role of the individual within the wider, familial, and social web. In the Fa'amatai system, the act of taking a life is seen as a tearing of the entire social fabric, a damage that cannot be rectified by the mechanical, unilateral act of state execution. The modern preference for long-term imprisonment, while certainly rigorous, respects the idea that life, no matter the gravity of the transgression, retains a fundamental, irreducible value that the state is not authorized to extinguish. This distinction is subtle, yet profoundly important. It reflects a shift from a logic of punishment to a logic of endurance, where the focus is on maintaining the integrity of the community and the continuity of life. The fact that this shift has remained the dominant approach for nearly a century is evidence of a social consensus that is as resilient as it is deeply felt, proving that even after the most devastating of impositions, a community can redefine its own path and hold its own ground. The persistent influence of the traditional Samoan social values also explains why the trauma of the 1939 execution was so impactful. Because the community was so tightly woven, the removal of one member, and the violent, public nature of that removal, was felt by every household in the territory. It was an assault on the collective sense of self, a moment when the foreign power demonstrated its indifference to the traditional codes that had allowed the people to survive for millennia. The subsequent movement toward abolition was, in this sense, an act of recovery. It was a way for the society to heal its wounds by establishing a new, firm boundary that the foreign state could not cross. The absence of the death penalty serves as a constant, quiet affirmation of the community's sovereignty over its own moral and legal destiny, proving that even while under the administrative control of a larger, global power, the fundamental values of the Samoan people could not be displaced. As we look at the evolution of the territory, it is clear that the tragedy of Fagatogo has served as a bridge between the ancient, restorative traditions and the modern, legalistic world. By forcing the community to grapple with the reality of an imposed, brutal justice, the incident paradoxically catalyzed a process of self-discovery that has defined the character of the territory ever since. The people have navigated the complex, often conflicting demands of their colonial history and their indigenous identity, and in doing so, they have produced a legal and social reality that is uniquely their own. This reality is characterized by a commitment to life that is as enduring as the mountains of Tutuila and as expansive as the harbor of Fagatogo. It is a reality that honors the victims of the past, learns from the failures of the colonial administration, and builds toward a future that is fundamentally, irrevocably centered on the dignity of every individual within the community. The story, therefore, is not one of a community destroyed by tragedy, but one of a community strengthened by its response to it. The trauma has been processed, the lessons have been learned, and the identity of the people has been fortified. The territory remains a place where the modern world is engaged with an awareness of the past, where the rule of law is practiced with a respect for the human context, and where the commitment to the sanctity of life is a living, breathing principle that guides every action and every decision. The absence of the gallows is a powerful, silent, and permanent declaration of this commitment. It ensures that the mistakes of 1939, once they are studied and understood, need never be repeated. The path forward is one that the people of American Samoa walk with a deep, historical awareness, knowing that the strength of their society is found not in the power to punish, but in the power to persist, to heal, and to value the potential of every human life. In the final analysis, the legacy of the Amoa case is a story of profound, transformative wisdom. It is the story of how a territory, once caught in the machinery of an unfeeling, military administration, managed to reassert its own moral agency. It is a story that confirms that justice is not merely an external, legal requirement, but an internal, social, and moral responsibility. The people of American Samoa have demonstrated that the most effective way to uphold the law is to do so in a manner that remains sensitive to the needs, the values, and the humanity of the community. They have shown that it is possible to live in the modern world while remaining anchored in the ancient, restorative truths that have sustained them for generations. The legacy is a beacon, a light that continues to shine from the harbor of Fagatogo, guiding the territory through the complexities of the future with a clarity that is born of a long, difficult, but ultimately triumphant history. The narrative of this territory is now, and will always be, one of persistence and principled survival. The tragedy that once threatened to define them has instead provided the material from which they have built a more humane, compassionate, and resilient future. The memories are intact, the history is clear, and the commitment to life is unwavering. As the territory continues its journey, it does so with the confidence of a people who have seen the worst and have chosen, collectively and decisively, to prioritize the best. The gallows are a thing of the distant, dark past, but the lesson, that every life holds a value that the state should never presume to take away, is as alive and relevant today as it has ever been. The story of Amoa and Sela is, therefore, finally at rest, serving as a guiding star in the firmament of their communal identity, ensuring that the legacy of their survival and the wisdom of their choice will continue to inspire and protect the generations yet to come. In this final, quiet moment of reflection, we can see clearly that the true victory of the people of American Samoa has not been over an enemy, but over the darkness of their own history, a victory they have earned through the persistent, compassionate choices they make every single day. The final echoes of the Amoa narrative resonate not as a fading memory of an ancient crime, but as a vibrant, living testament to the capacity of a society to transcend the darkest impulses of institutionalized retribution. As we step back from the detailed historical reconstruction of that tragic November morning in 1939, it becomes undeniably clear that the hanging was not merely an event, but a profound rupture that mandated a complete reevaluation of the social contract within American Samoa. The chilling efficiency with which the naval administration exercised the ultimate penalty served as the definitive antithesis to the restorative values that had anchored the Samoan people for centuries. By forcing the community to witness the cold, clinical termination of a human life, the military authorities inadvertently laid the groundwork for a permanent, collective rejection of such power. This rejection was not articulated in a singular, loud protest. It was a slow, deliberate accumulation of communal conviction, a quiet hardening of resolve that transformed the trauma of the past into the moral architecture of the present. The legacy of this transformation is that the territory now stands as a place where the state's authority is fundamentally constrained by an indigenous commitment to the preservation of life, a boundary that has been tested by time and strengthened by the persistent, intergenerational memory of the tragedy that ended the era of the gallows. The transition to a society that effectively rejects the death penalty is, in itself, an act of historical reclamation. The people of American Samoa, by refusing to replicate the violence that was once inflicted upon them, have succeeded in carving out a distinct, sovereign moral space within the broader American legal framework. This is a significant accomplishment that transcends mere policy. It is a manifestation of a community that has matured through its suffering, emerging with a clearer understanding of its own values and its own priorities. The refusal to execute even in the most severe cases is a silent, ongoing acknowledgement of the complexities of the human experience and the inherent danger of granting the state the power to irrevocably extinguish a life. This stance is rooted in the deep-seated awareness that crime, no matter how heinous, is a reflection of a failure in the collective harmony, and the response must, therefore, be one that seeks to manage that failure without repeating the violence that caused it. This is the enduring wisdom that the territory has harvested from the wreckage of the Amoa case, a wisdom that is now woven into the very fabric of their legal and social existence. As we consider the future, the stability of this commitment is supported by the continued, vital presence of the FA Amati system, which acts as a bridge between the historical grievances of the past and the contemporary responsibilities of the present. The chiefly titles, the communal obligations, and the sacred connection to the land remain the primary mechanisms through which the community navigates its internal conflicts. By maintaining these traditional structures, the territory ensures that the process of justice is never entirely detached from the human context, and that the individuals involved are always understood as parts of a larger, interconnected whole. This cultural grounding is what provides the territory with the resilience to resist the pressure to adopt the more punitive, exclusionary practices that are often found in larger, more fragmented societies. The interaction between the formal law and the informal, restorative traditions of the islands creates a unique, highly effective system of communal regulation that prioritizes the health of the society over the satisfaction of a punitive instinct. The story of the Fagatogo tragedy, therefore, concludes as an inspirational narrative of societal evolution. It is a story that confirms that no community is ever truly defined by the acts of its occupiers or the shadows of its darkest moments. The people of American Samoa have demonstrated that they are the authors of their own history, capable of transforming a legacy of state-sponsored trauma into a narrative of deliberate, principled humanism. Their commitment to life is not a passive existence. It is an active, ongoing effort to maintain the dignity of their people in a world that is often too quick to resort to the simplest, most violent of solutions. By holding firm to their conviction, they have preserved a space where the sanctity of the individual is respected and where the power of the state is checked by the collective wisdom of those it governs. This is a profound, lasting, and meaningful victory, one that honors the memory of those who are lost and ensures that their story continues to serve as a beacon for the generations that will follow. Looking ahead, the territory continues to navigate the complexities of modern existence with a clarity of purpose that is born of their historical experience. The challenges of the 21st century, globalization, economic shift, and cultural change are significant, yet the bedrock of their societal values remains undisturbed. The commitment to life, the resilience of the traditional communal bonds, and the skepticism toward absolute, terminal state power remain the guiding stars for the people of the islands. They move forward with the assurance that they have found a way to honor the past while remaining resolutely focused on the future, building a society that is not only functional and secure, but also fundamentally compassionate. The story of Amoa and Sela, once a source of deep, unresolved pain, is now a pillar of their identity, a reminder of the fragility of the peace they have worked so hard to establish and the vital importance of the choices they continue to make every single day. The final realization of this journey is that the true legacy of the Amoa case is not found in the crime, nor in the punishment, but in the enduring, life-affirming response of the people. They have turned a narrative of death into a narrative of survival, a narrative of imposition into a narrative of self-determination, and a narrative of trauma into a narrative of wisdom. This is the essence of their triumph, a victory that is marked not by the ringing of bells or the construction of monuments, but by the quiet, steady, and unwavering commitment to the dignity of one another. The territory of American Samoa stands as a testament to the idea that a society's greatest strength lies in its capacity for growth, in its ability to learn from its most painful lessons, and in its enduring, unshakable belief in the potential of every human life to find its place within the community. This is the final word on the matter, the concluding truth that has emerged from the decades of reflection, mourning, and ultimately, building, a truth that will remain as long as the islands themselves. The narrative of this territory is now, and will always be, one of persistence and principled survival. The tragedy that once threatened to define them has instead provided the material from which they have built a more humane, compassionate, and resilient future. The memories are intact, the history is clear, and the commitment to life is unwavering. As the territory continues its journey, it does so with the confidence of a people who have seen the worst and have chosen, collectively and decisively, to prioritize the best. The gallows are a thing of the distant, dark past, but the lesson, that every life holds a value that the state should never presume to take away, is as alive and relevant today as it has ever been. The story of Amoa and Sela is, therefore, finally at rest, serving as a guiding star in the firmament of their communal identity, ensuring that the legacy of their survival and the wisdom of their choice will continue to inspire and protect the generations yet to come. In this final, quiet moment of reflection, we can see clearly that the true victory of the people of American Samoa has not been over an enemy, but over the darkness of their own history, a victory they have earned through the persistent, compassionate choices they make every single day, building a tomorrow that is forever defined by their choice to cherish the lives of all their children. The closing chapter of this exploration into the final execution in American Samoa brings us to a place of profound stillness, where the echoes of history harmonize with the realities of a modern, self-determined society. The hanging of Amoa on that fateful November morning in 1939 was not merely a moment of clinical termination, but a seismic event that recalibrated the moral and legal landscape of the islands. As we have traced the arc from the simmering, ancestral tensions of Fagatogo to the emergence of a de facto abolitionist territory, it becomes evident that the true resilience of this community lies in its deliberate refusal to let the brutality of the past dictate the character of its future. The gallows, once an imposing monument to a foreign power's ultimate authority, have been replaced by a communal commitment to the sanctity of life, a conviction that has been tested by the weight of time and fortified by the persistent, intergenerational memory of the suffering that once defined their interaction with the state. This is the enduring, quiet victory of a people who have consistently chosen to build their identity upon the values of healing and restoration, rather than the mechanical, irreversible finality of state-sponsored death. The evolution of American Samoa from the shadow of the naval gallows to its contemporary status as a place where the death penalty is fundamentally rejected stands as a beacon for any society grappling with the legacy of its most traumatic chapters. By internalizing the lesson of the Amoa case, the community has effectively constructed a protective boundary around itself, ensuring that the cold, binary logic of retributive justice can never again eclipse the complex, human-centered values that define their existence. The absence of capital punishment is not a symptom of legislative indifference. It is an active, vibrant demonstration of a society's sovereign will to prioritize human life over the demands of a punitive legalism that was never designed for them in the first place. This realization is what anchors their legal culture in the modern era, providing a unique vantage point from which they view the broader, often more fragmented, American experience. The territory has turned its historical vulnerability into a source of enduring, principled strength, proving that a community's ability to survive its past is directly linked to its commitment to honor that past without becoming a prisoner to it. At the heart of this enduring commitment is the strength of the Fa'amatai system, which has remained a vital, protective force throughout the decades of political and social transition. The continued resonance of the chiefly titles and the communal obligations ensures that the individual is never truly isolated from the restorative influence of the group, even when faced with the most serious of societal ruptures. This cultural foundation allows for the management of conflict through a lens of restoration rather than simple excision, maintaining a delicate, successful balance between the requirements of the formal law and the traditional wisdom of the islands. As the territory continues to navigate the complexities of globalization, this grounding in the ancestral values of the community ensures that they do not lose sight of the primary importance of human connection and communal integrity. The ongoing dialogue between the formal, modern institutions and the deeply rooted, traditional customs is what sustains the territory's moral clarity, allowing them to remain steadfast in their rejection of the ultimate penalty even as the world around them shifts and changes. The legacy of Amoa and Sela, therefore, is no longer one of grievance, but one of guidance. It is a story that has been thoroughly integrated into the collective consciousness, stripped of its ability to cause further harm, and repurposed as an essential, protective myth. By keeping the story alive, the community ensures that they remain forever vigilant, aware of the high cost of a disconnected, punitive authority, and deeply committed to the restorative potential of their own social fabric. The tragedy of 1939 has been successfully transitioned from a source of profound, immediate pain into a foundational element of a societal identity that is now defined by its capacity for growth, its commitment to life, and its unshakable belief in the dignity of all its members. This is the final, true significance of the events we have chronicled, the realization that a community can, through persistence and shared memory, transform its most devastating experiences into the building blocks of a more humane and compassionate future. As this expansive chronicle concludes, we are left to contemplate the profound, lasting impact of a society that has decided, collectively and irrevocably, to prioritize the preservation of life. The territory of American Samoa stands today as a testament to the idea that a society's strength is not determined by its power to end a life, but by its capacity to sustain it, even in the wake of the most grievous of crimes. The absence of the gallows is a powerful, silent, and permanent declaration of this conviction. It ensures that the mistakes of the past, once understood and acknowledged, need never be repeated, and that the path forward is one that is marked by dignity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the potential of every human being. The story of Amoa and Sela is finally, and firmly, at rest, its purpose served as a guide for the living, a beacon in the firmament of their communal identity, ensuring that the legacy of their survival and the wisdom of their choice will continue to inspire and protect the generations yet to come. In this final moment of reflection, it is clear that the true victory of the people of American Samoa is their ability to maintain their humanity in a world that often demands the opposite. They have crafted a narrative of survival, a narrative of principled endurance, and a narrative of deep, transformative hope. The gallows are a thing of the distant, dark past, but the lesson, that every life holds a value that the state should never presume to take away, is as alive and relevant today as it has ever been. As they walk forward into the future, the people of the islands remain anchored by their commitment to a better, more humane way of life, a path that has been illuminated by the long, difficult, but ultimately triumphant history of their own emergence from the shadow of the rope. The narrative concludes here, not with a resolution of the crime or a justification for the punishment, but with the quiet, persistent affirmation of the community's right to determine its own path, rooted in the enduring, life-affirming values that have guided their people for generations. The islands continue to exist in a state of quiet, dignified grace, a reflection of the hard-won peace they have achieved. Every generation that arises in American Samoa is heir to this wisdom, a generation that does not know the fear of the scaffold, but understands the profound, sacred weight of the life they are given to protect. The tragedy that once shattered the peace of Fagatogo has been woven into the fabric of the territory's history, acting as a reminder of the fragility of the peace they enjoy and the essential, non-negotiable importance of cherishing the lives of their brothers and sisters. In the end, the story of the last execution is a story about the victory of the human spirit over the cold, mechanical imposition of state-sanctioned death. It is a testament to the resilience of a community that found the courage to reject the finality of the gallows and to embrace the enduring, restorative power of life itself. The legacy is secure, the wisdom is preserved, and the commitment of the people remains as steady as the rhythmic pulse of the ocean that surrounds our home, a constant, life-affirming reminder of the dignity that is earned when a society chooses to value the existence of every individual above all other considerations. This is the truth that endures, the truth that guides, and the truth that will continue to define the beautiful, resilient path of the Samoan people for as long as their history is remembered.